Welcome. I'm Pastor David. Come on into my office here at the beautiful Nicktoss Speedway. This happens to be the first message I'm recording in the new year, 2022. And I got to be honest, looking back as the years have gone by, I find it really hard to believe this is 2022. I can remember being a kid in the 1970s thinking that when the year 2000 arrived, I was going to be an old man, and that's 22 years past. So if I was an old man in the year 2000, you can just imagine what I am now. I'm starting a new series to go in my just general messages. I'm kind of thinking of calling this the opposite series. Taking the Ten Commandments and looking how, at each and every step of the way, our society has begun to really not just adopt the opposite of God's commandments, but to enforce the opposite of God's commandments. I'm going to start with the ninth commandment, which says, "Thou shalt not bear false witness." It seems like a good one to start with because over the past number of weeks, even a couple of months, this phrase keeps coming up in my mind, which is, "Thou shalt bear false witness," as a motto for the society in which we live today. And now you might think that's an absolutely ridiculous statement that we would live in a society that wants to bear false witness. In fact, however, uh, as you know, many people in our society are moving towards a socialistic way of thinking, or they're moving into other religions. In other religions and in socialism, bearing false witness is a command. You know, deceive the innocent, lie to the people. This is a command for some people. If you've ever watched any Jordan Peterson, you may have seen a video where he talks about how in communism, bearing false witness, telling lies to the people all the time is absolutely critical to controlling the people. Like you think of the Soviet Union. In the Soviet Union, they had two official government newspapers. I believe one was called TASS, the other was called Pravda. And they were chock full of stories. And people would read these newspapers in order to know what to believe that day. Now, the next day you had to read the paper because truth might have changed, or the official dogma of the government might have changed. And so, you know, one day you might believe that Germany was your friend, and the next day you might believe that Germany was your enemy. You only knew this by reading the newspaper in the Soviet Union. Well, thank goodness we live here in the West where journalists have integrity, right? Well, maybe not as much as we would like to give them credit for. I remember taking a course in the 1980s, and one of the classes we took was on journalism. And the guy who taught the course was a journalist, and he was pretty disgusted with the whole field of journalism because he saw so much politics, he saw so much corruption in the journalistic field. He decided to get out of it, and you know, he kind of had a very negative attitude. Now you might think, okay, sure, all right, he was the only one. He was the only person ever soured on being a reporter. But I remember in 1984, this is a few years before that, I took a job, student job, and you know, when you were a student in university, sometimes you took jobs for which you were eminently not qualified and not capable of performing. And I took this student job working for one of the newspapers in Halifax, not saying which one. But in 1984, there was a big push on to get new subscribers to the newspaper. And so I was one of, 10 billion students hired in Halifax area. And I went to the local newspaper. And the lady in charge, she was probably in her mid-20s then, would not let us go up to the newsroom. Now, her description of the newsroom, it was kind of vague, but for her, the impression she left us was the newsroom where all the reporters worked was a pretty disgusting place. If we ever saw how reporters lived at work and how they worked and how they did things, we'd probably never trust a reporter again. And, I've heard it said recently that the average reporter this day, which was certainly true of that I've heard of from the past, had a gift for substance abuse. And so, um, just the environment of reporting and, the media in North America has been, for a long, long time, an industry that's not exactly living up to the integrity that people have invested into, or people trust the media more than they deserve. And you can think of yellow journalism in the late 19th and early 20th century, and if you don't know what that is, go and look it up, and how yellow journalists really helped to form public policy, public opinion, even getting the United States involved in at least one war, the war with the Spanish, in the late 19th century. And there's such a lack of integrity in yellow journalism, and yet it seems like that's the go-to for the media today, yellow journalism. And the difficulty I have is at knowing how dishonest the media has been for a long, long time. Why do people still trust the media? And it gets even worse. There's this. Let me read this to you. There's this thing called Knowles Law, Knoll, Knowles Law of Media Accuracy, which says, remember that not everything in the news is true. Knowles' law of media accuracy is the adage that everything you read in the newspapers is absolutely true, except for the rare story of which you happen to have first-hand knowledge. Did you get that? Everything in the media is true, except for those stories that you actually know what happened. And I can give you some examples, even in my lifetime, where if you look into it a bit, people absolutely trust the media, but the media certainly didn't deserve that trust. Now, I remember as a young person hearing stories of reporters in Vietnam. And yes, I'm old enough to remember the Vietnam War. Stories of reporters in Vietnam who would go into a village, and they would pay the locals something around $50 to burn down their village, and so that they could, the reporter could have a nice backdrop for their report and make it look like the American military had come in and burned the village. Now, I've heard other reporters since then saying, "Oh, I never saw such a thing," but I've read a couple of reporters over the years who have said yes, they witnessed it happening. They witnessed colleagues doing such a thing. More than one colleague, more than one reporter in Vietnam would go in and pay the locals some money so that they would burn their village, so that they would have a really good looking backdrop for the news report, and the implication being the American army was evil. Another instance I can think of that I became aware of in my teens was something that happened to a Canadian pastor by the name of David Maines. Maybe some of you have heard of David Maines. Back in the early 1980s, David Maines was running a ministry called 100 Huntley Street. They were on TV every day, and a CBC reporter wanted to interview David Maines on his reaction to some of the outcry over some American, especially American, televangelists who are making obscene amounts of money. Now, that was something that went on then. If I told you what some of the pastors in the denomination I came out of, what they were making at the time, you would think, how can they call themselves Christian? I remember in one of my pastoral theology classes, 1985, a leader of a church, 1,000 members, not going to say what church or who the pastor was, came in and gave a guest lecture at the class. And one of the students at the end of it, the question and answer period, said, "Brother, how much money do you make as a pastor?" And he said, without batting an eyelash and moving right on to the next question, he said, "I make $1 million a year." That was 1985. David Maines at that time made significantly less than $75,000 a year running this nationwide ministry. And this reporter wanted to interview David Maines. He says, "Sure, come on down." And so the reporter came down and he showed up in a limousine. Now, he had rented the limo just for the interview. And this is what David Maines reported on his show, 100 Huntley Street. And he said, "Come on into the office." And the reporter said, "No, I want to interview you in the limo." And David Maines said, "I've never been in a limo before, and I'm not going to go into one for an interview. Come into my office and we'll conduct the interview." Reporter refused, and David Maines refused to get into the limo. So eventually the reporter just drove off without the interview. And David Maines reported this on 100 Huntley Street. And the implication being that this reporter wanted the people who saw the interview to assume it was David Maines' limo, that he was making gobs of money, so much so that he owned his own private limo. That would have been a very misleading interview. And you could say, well, yeah, but he wasn't going to say it was David Maines' limo. He didn't have to. The image would have been in people's heads. It reminded me of something that took place in the 1974 Canadian election, where a picture was put in the newspaper of Conservative leader Lester B. Pearson. Lester B. Pearson was called the best Prime Minister Canada never had. The media were fully and completely on the side of the Trudeau Liberals. That was Pierre Elliott Trudeau, the father of Justin Trudeau. And did you catch the implication there? I didn't say anything that was incorrect. But what was the implication I just made? That's what the media does. Anyway, that's an aside. Going back to it. It was a picture of Pearson. He had been throwing the football around with some of his staffers, and he fumbled a catch. Everybody was catching some, fumbling some, but he fumbled a catch. That was the only picture that was published. A whole series of pictures taken of Pearson throwing really good footballs, Pearson, catching the football really well. But that one fumble picture was all that made it to the paper, and the implication was Pearson fumbles politically. And it was said, and it's been said by many people, that one photograph cost Lester B. Pearson the 1974 election. Not a whole lot of journalistic integrity in that. But it gets worse. You think of, this screaming that people have, use my correct pronouns, or you're a racist, bigot, homophobe, transphobe, whatever. And so the media goes all out of its way to use the correct pronouns. Um, the pro-life movement has never been allowed to use their own title. They call themselves pro-life. The newspapers either call them anti-choice or anti-abortion. Is that how they see themselves? No. But the media is trying to slant the views and the opinions of the people, and they don't care if they have to lie. They don't have to. They don't care if they mislead. They don't care if they want to leave you with the wrong impression, because the goal is to get through their agenda. I have a personal experience with this. In 1987, in the town that I was living in, the city that I was living in, there was a pro-life rally. This is when Henry Morgentaler was going through the court system, getting rid of all restrictions on abortions to make Canada the same as North Korea. And so at the local hospital, there was a rally in favor of the pro-life stance. I was dragged against my will. I went because I really had no choice. My family was going, and I had to go. And I was standing there bored. I don't do rallies. Standing there bored. I didn't really care for listening to people's speeches. They were kind of meaningless to me because, either you're for the value of human life or you're against the value of human life. That's as simple as that. And you might think, well, no, it's a great, complicated issue. You know what? Go read C. Everett Koop's book, The Right to Live, The Right to Die, and then come back. We'll have a conversation. Anyway, I'm there at the rally. Don't want to be there, so I count the people. I count what I can see, about 1,100 people, but there's an area with, I don't know, 50, 100 people, whatever. And I don't count them. At the end of the rally, the people there are saying there's 1,300 people here, and I thought, maybe, that's a little bit high. Maybe 1,150, maybe 1,200, but 1,300 I'm not so sure about. But then they had an advantage I didn't have. Next day, I'm back at the hospital. I'm in Emerge. I've brought somebody to Emerge, somebody who likes to be in Emerge a lot. Not saying who they were. And so I spent the whole day with this person at Emerge. And outside the emergency department window is the same area where the protest took place the previous day. And that day, there's a pro-abortion protest. And you say, well, they're pro-choice. No, they're pro-abortion. There was a pro-abortion protest. So I thought, well, I counted them yesterday. I'll count them today. So I counted them. I counted them when they showed up. There was 38 protesters. A couple hours later, I looked out. They were still there protesting. I counted them again. There was 38 protesters. A couple hours after that, they were still there. So I counted them again. There was 38 protesters. When the group had showed up, there was 38. When the group left, there was 38. All through, there was 38. There were 38 protesters. Here's how the newspapers ran it. For the protest in favor of life, they said there was over 100 protesters. For the protest in favor of abortion, the newspaper said there was almost 100 protesters. Now, if you were reading the paper, technically that could be considered true, although saying 38 is almost 100 is pushing it. But it would leave the reader with a very different picture than what was real. Okay, well, that was just that. That was just the abortion issue. The people can, with the abortion issue, they can be so politically motivated, they lose track of reality. let me tell you about a friend of mine. And when I say a friend, he was on that uh, periphery of just being an acquaintance. I knew him. We were friendly. If I saw him in town, we would chat. I would often go into where he worked because I had reasons to buy things there, and he was usually the guy who waited on me. He'd give good deals to friends, and I had no idea that 22 years before, his little son, his 2-year-old son, or sorry, 20 years before, his 2-year-old son had been kidnapped by his ex-wife. He'd gotten divorced, he got custody, she had visitation, and one day she came to visit, took the son out for a few hours visit, never came back, and that was the last he saw of his son for 20 years. Eventually, she was arrested in Florida for a crime she was committing there, and her name came up on an international arrest warrant for this kidnapping from 20 years before. So she was extradited back to Nova Scotia and put on trial and found guilty, given an absolute discharge. So found guilty, but no criminal record. And all of the media, the papers, all the TV channels, I remember this very distinctly, said her ex-husband got up and pled for clemency. He pled for clemency. And that was a deciding factor in the judge's decision. So I went to my friend. I said, "Did you really do that?" And he said, "Let me tell you what happened." He said, when she kidnapped my son, she went to Texas. Well, Pastor David, you just said she was arrested in Florida. She was. We'll get there. She went to Texas, got married again, had a little girl. So now she's got her son and a little girl with her new husband. When her son was 9 years old, she left her second husband, she left her 2 kids, and took off with another guy. As far as I know, she never saw her children again after that. But at the age of 9, this 2-year-old had been abandoned by his mother. She took off to Texas and was living, the life where, there was drugs and all that kind of lifestyle. And she got arrested there. 11 years later, she came back, had the trial, had an incredibly skillful lawyer who said, well, she has to have an absolute discharge or she'll never get to be an American citizen. And I don't know if she ever went back to the States or not. Nobody I've ever talked to has brought me up to date on that. But my friend stood up at the victim and made a victim impact statement. Here's what he said. He said, "I don't care what you do. You can lock her up and throw away the key. You can let her go. It's not going to make any difference to me. She took my son from me when he was a little boy. All of those years of being with my son and helping him to grow, watching him grow, they're gone. I could never get them back. Nothing you can do can give me justice. Do what you want." The media took that as a plea for clemency. The media has an agenda. Former Christian Frank Schaeffer, and when I use the word Christian, I almost have to air quote that. Former writer for the Christian community, Frank Schaeffer, that's the son of Francis Schaeffer. And you never know where he is theologically because he kind of bounces around. He was evangelical Protestant for a while, a Greek Orthodox atheist. I don't know where he is at. He wrote a book describing how the media is overwhelmingly leftist in their bias. And this is a book in the early 80s, like 1982, somewhere in that range. And it hasn't changed. The media is overwhelmingly biased towards a viewpoint, towards a philosophy which is, excuse me, not committed to the truth. Telling the truth or telling the lie, it's irrelevant to them one way or the other. The only thing that matters is the agenda. So if a white man in Charlottesville drives a car into a crowd and kills a woman, that's a racist attack. True enough. But if a black man in Wisconsin drives a minivan into a crowd, injuring dozens, killing 5, that's not a racist attack. Where virtually all the victims were white, where the intended target was white people, where this guy has, a history of putting out racist statements, supporting racist organizations, black racists. There's an agenda there. When in 2019, 9 unarmed black men were killed by the police in the United States, and then someone went out and interviewed the black community and asked how many unarmed black men were killed by the police in 2019. Over 1,000. Where'd they get that idea from? Who's giving them that idea? Who's letting them believe or leading them to believe that it's thousands? It falls on the shoulders of the media. And the Christian response to this has to be, we steel ourselves with the truth. I heard a story that Pablo Picasso had a number of mistresses over the years, and he played such head games with them that when he died, a number of them committed suicide, but one did not. And she was asked, well, why didn't you? He said, whenever I went to visit him, I had to steel myself with the truth, because Picasso liked to play head games. And I think the media likes to play head games to the point where they want us to trust only them. No matter what they tell us. They could look up at the sky, see that it's blue, and say the sky is green, or the sky is purple, or the sky has got, pink polka dots in it today. And people will say, oh, the sky must have pink polka dots because the media told me. As Christians, we need to be a lot more careful. We have to understand the media has an anti-Christian perspective, has had this at least my entire life, and I'm in my 50s. Like maybe you've heard the saying, most wars in the world are caused by religion. Actually, that's not a correct statement. If you go to either the Encyclopedia of War or the Encyclopedia of Wars, there's two encyclopedia sets that recount war over the last 5,000 years, and you look at the causes of all the wars, right around 93% of the wars that have been fought over the last 5,000 years have been fought for reasons other than religion. So now you got 7% left. Well, Christians must be responsible for the 7%, right? Well, maybe not. If you divide up that 7%, you got 4 and 3. 4% of all the wars fought in the name of religion are fought in the name of Islam. The other 3% are all the other religions put together. The media has an agenda, and as Christians, we need to steel ourselves with the truth. Remember, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. If your trust in the media trumps your trust in Christ Jesus, it is a rejection of truth. And keep in mind, God finds this dishonesty in the media abhorrent. Let me give you a scripture passage from the book of Proverbs. You might have thought I was going to the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not bear false witness. The book of Proverbs here, chapter 6, verses 16 to 19. Written in typical Hebrew wisdom literature style. There are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a person who stirs up dissension in the community. A lying tongue, a false witness. Far too many reporters have lying tongues, and far too many reporters have been false witnesses down through history. And as people who are meant to be committed to the truth, we need to be very, very careful. And you got to remember Knowles' law. Now, I'm not saying everything a reporter says is a lie, but a lot of times what they say is misleading. You think of what a witness is supposed to swear to when they go into a court trial, and they put their hand on the Bible or on their heart or whatever, and they are sworn in to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, or some variation of that phrase. Tell the truth. Don't lie. Tell the truth, the whole truth. Don't leave out parts of the truth in order to let people think something which is the opposite of what really happened. And nothing but the truth. Don't add in lies to color the truth. And this should be what we expect of our media, but that's not what we really get. Need to practice Knowles' law. Go look it up, read about it, but understand that the media has an agenda. Sometimes the agenda could be as simple as ratings, getting more money, increasing salary. Some reporters sensationalize what they've experienced or what they've been through in order to get themselves a better reputation or to get a pay raise. You think about a famous trial that took place recently where people have said that a particular actor faked a hate crime because at that point he was in the middle of contract negotiations, and if he had the sympathy of society behind him, it could get him a bigger payday. That's a possibility. Sometimes you got to realize that the media, and I make a bold step right here at the end, sometimes scientists have an agenda. And there are many famous cases of scientists who falsified their research because they had an agenda. As Christians, we need to be as gentle as doves, but we need to be as wise as serpents. Now, And this applies to how we approach the media. Sometimes I've seen Christians do the opposite. Sometimes I've seen Christians who are as gentle as serpents and as wise as doves. That's not what we're called to. We're called to have wisdom in how we look at things. And if that means not necessarily trusting the media when they tell something, that we need to find some backup information, then that's what we need to do, because we live in a culture that loves falsehoods. We live in a culture that loves the lie, hates the truth. And we're supposed to be committed to the truth. And yet time and again, I see how lies creep into congregations, into the pastorate. I see how lies creep into the hearts and the minds of individual believers. We need to be careful. We need to be very, very careful to protect the truth. So when something comes up and we can't know, is this true or not? We only have the word of the media. We need to suspend judgment. I remember having an online conversation with a fellow pastor who came down pretty hard on one side of a topic where there was no evidence to conclusively say one side was right and the other side was wrong, or one side was right and the other side was wrong. If you were being honest, you'd have to say, I don't know the truth. Maybe he's telling the truth, maybe she's telling the truth, maybe they're both lying. I don't know. And it's not my place to judge. And it's not my place to take sides. But he took sides. And to me, that damaged his ministry, because forever after, he was aligning himself with a particular viewpoint without regard to whether or not it was provable in court. As Christians, we need to be very, very careful. And wherever possible, if we can do our own investigation into an incident, do so. And if it's not possible, look for people who try to commit themselves to the truth. Even if it means you don't trust your favorite news reporter. Even if it means you don't trust your favorite news channel. So, as Christians, we live in a society, let's just sum this up. As Christians, we live in a society which says, thou shalt bear false witness, as long as it fits your agenda, as long as it fits your feelings, as long as it fits your viewpoint. But we are called to follow a God who says that he is the truth. And it's got nothing to do with our feelings. So be very careful as a Christian as you watch the media, as you listen to the news, as you read the paper. Keep in mind what you're seeing is guaranteed not to be 100% true, but is often virtually false or misleading, to the point where you're going to walk away with an incorrect conclusion. So I just want to leave that with you. As Christians, our commitment is to the truth. God bless and have a happy New Year.